Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video that I'm going to review by Mr. Boxing Ego. Ego, in my view, is a very particularly interesting channel. And the reason why I say that is because even though there are certain times where I tend to agree with some of his sentiments, of course, there's a lot of the times where I think that he has a little bit of bias and sometimes racial or at least politically motivated statements as well. And when I say politically motivated statements, what I mean to say by politically motivated is that he is very pro PBC. So a lot of the fighters that are with the PBC or certain fighters that have remained with them, such as Errol Spence Jr., Deontay Wilder, Gervonta Tank Davis, he pretty much has shown blind loyalty to, which of course certain people would have a certain amount of admiration for. But when you're supposed to be a boxing reporter or a boxing channel or someone that reports the news, whether you be on YouTube or ESPN or Ring Magazine or whatever it may be, you're supposed to report the news in somewhat of a logical and objective manner. And that's a big part of the reason why I like to review a lot of these channels. At times also reviewing ESPN and also sometimes maybe Ring Magazine here and there. I may post an article about them here and there or review an article by them here and there. I may start doing that a little bit more or possibly something else. But anyways, the reason why I wanted to review this is because Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis, in his next fight against Mr. Lamont Roach Jr., a fight that absolutely nobody wants to see whatsoever. Boxing Ego is actually going to try to make the debate that Lamont Roach Jr. is actually bigger than that of Gervonta Tank Davis. And a certain amount of the Gervonta Tank Davis fans, they keep trying to make this argument, of we're all about Gervonta Tank Davis. Well, he's fighting a guy that overall just beat Hector Garcia. And on top of that, Gervonta really ain't that big and blah, blah, blah. And listen, what I'll state is this. In my personal view, Gervonta Tank Davis, you could possibly debate that he is about a natural 130 to 135 pounder. Now, my personal view, he's probably more of a natural 135 pounder because even though he's only about 5'6" with about a 67 to 68 inch arm reach, he is a little bit girthier. He's a little bit like Canelo Alvarez, to where Canelo Alvarez probably isn't all the way, super middleweight, but he's almost like a tweener, at least at this stage in his career, between middleweight and super middleweight. He's definitely not a light heavyweight, and I don't even think he's all the way super middleweight. But, to be fair, Canelo, in my view, would really be more of a natural middleweight because even Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Bubu Andrade, and a lot of the fighters that were at the middleweight division, they're actually heavier than what Canelo Alvarez is that you just don't know that because they've never really fought at the super middleweight division before, so they've never had the chance to really rehydrate fully, at least overall, within those, rings and balloon up in weight as really as much as what they wanted to. As we've seen with Demetrius Bubu Andrade against David Benavidez, he rehydrated to about 190 something pounds, even heavier than Canelo. Jamel Charlo rehydrated to about 187, even heavier than Canelo, I believe. Now, of course, just because you balloon up in weight doesn't always mean that that's really what your best fighting weight is at, and it's a little bit hard to tell because those fighters moved up one or two weight divisions, in weight. So it's a little bit tough to tell, but once again, those fighters, in my view, they're even a little bit bigger than what Canelo is. However, I don't think that, at least in my personal view, I don't think that there's actually a legitimate debate that Lamont Roach Jr. is actually bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis. And this is just my personal view about Gervonta Tank Davis. Once again, I think the man is a great, great talent. But this is a fight that absolutely nobody asked for. Now, to be fair to the man, once again, I'm not going to go completely against him because, of course, he did try to make the Vasily Lomachenko fight, and he did try to make, I believe, possibly some other fights out there. This is pretty much the first year where I've seen Gervonta Tank Davis actually try to go for some of the bigger fish out there in the pond. This is pretty much the first year that I've seen him do that, which is why I've pretty much, given Gervonta Tank Davis a certain amount of criticism. But Boxing Ego, as we all know, debatably Gervonta Tank Davis's biggest supporter and biggest fan out there, and biggest defender. He's going to try overall once again to defend the fight and really try to make the case that, Lamont Roach Jr. is somehow bigger than that of Gervonta Tank Davis. And I mean, when you take a look at the metrics, I think that he's about an inch taller, but other than that, I don't think that he's legitimately bigger than that of Gervonta Tank Davis. But it's just very particularly interesting because also the other interesting thing is that Gervonta Tank Davis is bringing up Lamont Roach Jr. from one weight class. And we all know what the criticism was for other fighters, such as Canelo Alvarez doing this. We all know that apparently Boxing Ego didn't like Canelo Alvarez fighting Golovkin or possibly Jamal Charlo or possibly Jamel Charlo because he was moving them up in weight. Even though all those fighters possibly, other than maybe Gennady Golovkin, were probably bigger than that of a than a Canelo Alvarez. But Canelo Alvarez received a great amount of criticism for this, as well as other fighters, even moving up a fighter one weight class. Isn't it very particularly interesting, once again, how they show you, once again, that their standards will completely change depending on the personal fighter that it is. It's just very particularly interesting. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say.
The size up, let's get it. Now, the funny thing is, with all the hate that Gervonta Davis receives, I notice when it's something that doesn't fit the hateful, disparaging comment narrative, I notice the usual suspects and old media, they just say nothing, right? Like, for example, it's very selective. Tank Davis said that when he sees Teofimo, he gonna slap him up. You have a lot of old media that reported that aspect, just that comment, saying that Teofimo was gonna get slapped up. But the context, if you actually watch the clip that they conveniently left out, is he said I was gonna slap up Teofimo for that racist-ish that he was doing. And what he's referring to is calling Terrence Crawford and Gervonta Tank Davis a monkey, which I've already talked about on my channel. And he repeatedly said it, and he doubled down on it. And the funny thing is, old media refuses to address the actual concern and put it in context. They just, like, you would think that he just said, I'm going to slap Teofimo Lopez. Like, that's telling half of a story. It's like what little kids do.
Well, I somewhat agree with that, Mr. Boxing Ego. And also what I will say is this, Teofimo Lopez, is he possibly a racist? I mean, who knows? I don't know. He definitely has made some inflammatory comments about certain black fighters. At least certain people would find them as inflammatory. Now, maybe he could just be stating that because he thought they were getting preferential treatment, or maybe behind closed doors, that's what he truly thinks. It's very possible that behind closed doors, that's what he truly thinks. I really don't know. But of course, there was inflammatory or there was a little bit of press behind that because, of course, for those of you that don't know, Teofimo said something along the lines of, they call both of those fighters, or they call him a monkey. He calls himself a monkey. So whichever monkey gets the banana first, let's go. And of course, he was talking about both Gervonta Tank Davis and Terrence Bud Crawford. Now, whether he was meaning to be actually racially inclined, who knows? It's very possible. But, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, once again, of course, it was taken a little bit out of context. Yes, Gervonta Tank Davis did say that he was going to slap Teofimo Lopez up for that comment. Now, the big question will be, is that fight potentially going to happen at 140 pounds? Because that would be a humongous fight between Gervonta Tank Davis and Teofimo Lopez. And we'll see if Gervonta Tank Davis is going to take steps to take that fight, as well as Teofimo Lopez. Because Teofimo Lopez, even though he's taken some big fights in his career, there have been some fights overall where he hasn't really seemed super enthusiastic in terms of taking that fight, including the Devin Haney fight. But I mean, we'll see.
Sibling runs in, snitches to your parent, and say, oh, big brother hit me. Big brother hit me. But they don't tell how you pushed them off a bike and said a cuss word. They're not going to tell you what they did. They're only going to tell you what happened as a result of what they did. And this is what went on with Tank Davis. Tank said in the same sentence, not like he said it and then later he added it on. It's, if you have time to pull quote from the interview, he said it right after, so you would have known that he said, I'm going to slap Tio for that racist ish he on. He on that racist time, right? Calling people a monkey, basically, right? They don't want to talk about that. The other thing with the size up is that Lamont Roach, everybody kept talking about how Tank, just like Hector Luis Garcia, was pulling up a champion from 130. But what they're not...
Right, but here's the thing, Mr. Boxing Ego. You pretty much overall look like a complete hypocrite, at least to me within this video, because once again, you criticize Canelo Alvarez for pulling up Gennady Golovkin, for possibly pulling up Jamal Charlo, and pulling up Jamel Charlo. Now, to be fair, Jamel Charlo was coming up 2 weight classes, but Jamel Charlo really should be fighting at the middleweight division anyway. So, I mean, it is what it is, So, I mean, it's whatever. But, once again, Boxing Ego, how come these same standards were not, the same for Canelo Alvarez? Because Jamal Charlo really is bigger than what a Canelo Alvarez is. You know, when you talk about, once again, other possible fighters that he was going to pull up from 160, they are bigger or about the same size as Canelo Alvarez. So how come this was not the same thing with Canelo Alvarez? Because we all know that when this man was trying to quote unquote expose Canelo, that the thing that he didn't like is that, oh, well, you know, he's pulling on them up from one weight class. And I really don't like that fight because they're not adjusted to the weight. How come these same standards are not applied when Gervonta Tank Davis fought Hector Luis Garcia? And also when he's about to fight Lamont Roach, we don't hear anything about it.
Talking about real boxing talk is how in every picture, every angle, Lamont Roach looks bigger than Tank. Not only does he look taller, he really kind of looks fuller. Like, you know what I'm saying? You can look at a man in his shoulder, his stature, his, hand size. Pause. You guys get what I'm saying, right? And for all intents and purposes, Lamont Roach is bigger, despite him moving.
Well, you can really try to put that narrative out there all you want to. But once again, it's very particularly interesting, once again, how with certain fighters, you criticize them for bringing up a fighter from a different weight class, at least one weight class, because, you know, they weren't accustomed to that way. But with Gervonta Tank Davis, we don't hear anything about that. Isn't that very particularly interesting? And I mean, let's just be honest about Lamont Roach Jr. here really quickly. We can talk about the size all we want to and all this other bullshit, and we can talk about overall about, oh, you know, he's a little bit bigger. But even if he was slightly bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis, Lamont Roach Jr. is not really a super huge threat to Gervonta Tank Davis. Gervonta Tank Davis might be slightly shorter, but when you talk about, you know, overall the girth of both fighters, I mean, this is just my personal guess, but I highly doubt more than likely that Lamont Roach Jr. is going to be the same weight as Gervonta Tank Davis on fight night. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe they are going to be, or maybe Lamont Roach Jr. will be even bigger, but I highly doubt it because Gervonta Tank Davis looks like he rehydrates to about 150, possibly even 160 at certain times. So, I mean, we'll see. Gervonta Tank Davis is a girthier dude for that weight class. Now, he's a bit shorter, you know, but he is a little bit girthier. He does pack on a little bit more weight. You know, so it is what it is. But Lamont Roach Jr., if we're also going to talk about it, and Boxing Ego, this is the same dude that about a week ago criticized Shakur Stevenson's resume about how it's aging like milk. Well, if we're talking about Lamont Roach Jr., he might be a champion right now, but, you know, just several fights ago, you know, and several fights ago, of course, is quite a while. But keep in mind that Shakur Stevenson ended up dominating the champion that also handed Lamont Roach Jr. his only loss in Jamel Herring, whatever his name is, the former Marine fighter, I believe. And I don't think that that fighter was an A-grade level fighter at all. So once again, isn't it very particularly interesting about how we're talking about how Shakur Stevenson's resume is quote-unquote aging like milk? And in my personal view, I don't think Shakur has the best of resumes. To be honest with you, you could debate that he doesn't have one A-grade fighter on there. But the problem is that how many A-grade fighters does Gervonta Tank Davis really have? Because we're talking about resumes that are aging like milk. Rolly Romero, you know, for any of us that knew boxing, we all knew what Rolly Romero always was. He's a guy that talks a lot of shit, but you know, isn't really going to be able to back it up against the big boys. And even against Isaac Pitbull Cruz, who's a very, very one-dimensional fighter, he got his ass completely whooped in that fight. So, I mean, it is what it is. You know, it's whatever. But then you got Isaac Pitbull Cruz, who I've been saying for a very long time is a very one-dimensional fighter. He's very tough because he's powerful. He's got decent defense. And on top of that, the way that he fights, very aggressive. He's a very tough cookie. He's a very tough customer. You know, he's a very tough fighter to fight, but, you know, at the end of the day, once again, if you really know how to capitalize on his style and capitalize against his aggression and can fight someone in a multitude of ways, you can probably beat him. And as we've seen, Jose Valenzuela, who was not a flawless fighter by any means, he was recently able to beat Isaac Pitbull Cruz because Isaac Pitbull Cruz is not a legitimate great championship level fighter. And then, of course, you know, when you talk about Mario Barrios, he recently had a draw at the welterweight division. You know, the only reason why Isaac Pitbull Cruz, Mario Barrios, and Rolly Romero all became champions is because Al Heyman pretty much geniusly, put them in positions to where they would be champions in divisions to where pretty much all the belts were vacated in all those weight classes. Isaac Pitbull Cruz, Rolly Romero, and Mario Barrios all got their titles, besides Isaac Pitbull Cruz, all got their titles because of vacated belts that were recently vacated either by Josh Taylor or Terrence Bud Crawford. So let's stop bullshitting around. Like, you have these Gervonta Tank Davis fans that keep trying to say, oh, well, he's beating this champion and this champion. Those guys are not real, legitimate, usual championship level caliber fighters. I promise you that if Isaac Pitbull Cruz was around when Josh Taylor would have been unified, or would have been around when Jose Ramirez or one of those other guys were a champion, he would have not been a champion. Now, Isaac Pitbull Cruz potentially could have been a champion in a weight class, maybe, but Rolly Romero, no. Mario Barrios, when, there are certain actual good champions in a weight class, no. In my personal view, no.
up. And that's the thing with these weight classes. In this new generation, you have guys who are truly, truly at a weight class and they starve themselves, cut down. Like looking at the Richardson hit.
Agreed, just like the Charlo brothers. But you didn't mention that when Canelo Alvarez was bringing them up a weight class, did you? That was very particularly interesting. Once again, how you criticized Canelo Alvarez for bringing up guys a weight class, even though Jamal Charlo should clearly be fighting at the 168-pound weight class, and Jamal Charlo should at least be fighting at 160 pounds. Those guys have pretty much been weight bullies for the whole entire career, no offense, but it just is what it is. And I know I say that phrase often, but come on, I mean, those guys are weight bullies. Like, give me a break. So once again, it's very interesting how he didn't mention that, in that situation, but with this, all of a sudden, he talks about the context of the weight and the size.
Versus Liam Paro press conference was shocking. Mark Castro and Jalil Hackett, even a little.
And to talk about the Liam Paro versus Richardson Hitchens fight, which unfortunately I could not really talk about because I was away, somewhat on holiday. But, unfortunately, for Liam Paro, anyway, who I think is a very talented fighter, he did not really have the best game plan against the Richardson Hitchens. And no offense against Liam Paro, even though I think that he's a relatively talented fighter, he really showed me that I was somewhat wrong about him because he really did not have a multitude of game plans against that of a Richardson Hitchens. The athleticism I thought was potentially going to be a problem, as I thought Richardson Hitchens was at least going to be the quicker fighter, and that potentially the power was going to go in favor of Liam Paro, but it appeared that the power was probably about very similar. But the problem is that Liam Paro just had very little nuance in terms of his offensive attacks. And he tried to pressure after a while, but it doesn't really matter if you keep trying to attack with the same one or two attacks. And he really didn't have anything else other than a great mid-range jab and a left hand that he really tried to land. At times he would try to throw the right hook, and at times he would try to throw that left hand down to the body, which of course is a good, range of attack, but you got to try to mix things up a little bit more than that, especially with a guy that, if I'm going to be real, probably was about a weight class bigger than him. Richardson Hitchens is a guy that is noticeably big for that weight class. He probably was about a weight class bigger than Paro, but at the end of the day, if you're supposed to be the better fighter, one weight class isn't really supposed to make that much of a difference. So Liam Paro, I thought he lost that fight 8-4. But once again, he was supposed to perform better in that fight if he was the talent that I thought that he was. And he proved me incorrect. He proved me overall that, once again, that I thought that he was a little bit more talented than what he actually was. And he's a very talented fighter, but he showed nothing above a B grade level talent in that fight.
Richardson Hitchens, but not as much. But primarily Jalil Hackett and Mark Castro, their face look all sunken and it looked crazy. Because again, you have, I don't know if it's a lack of discipline, cutting out certain portions of training that the older fighters used to do, or a combination of these things. But now you have guys who are campaigning at a weight class and they have to deplete their bodies to get down there. Devin Haney is a
Yeah, but dude, this is nothing new. This has been happening since the beginning of time when it comes to boxing. When you talk about Oscar De La Hoya, once again, that's why whenever I talk about the Canelo versus Oscar De La Hoya conversation, Canelo's greater than Oscar De La Hoya. And I know a certain amount of people are going to say, oh, what are you talking about? Oscar beat Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Right, dude, Oscar De La Hoya is like, what, 5'10", 5'11", damn near 6 feet, and you're fighting 135-pounders like Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez? Or guys that are like, what, 5'6" to 5'7", that definitely don't have the size that you do? I mean, give me a fucking break. So Oscar De La Hoya, he was supposed to beat those guys. He was a decent amount bigger than those guys. Like, come on, man. Like Oscar De La Hoya, was not really supposed to be in those weight classes, but because he was younger and on top of that, he was kind of depleting himself a little bit early on in those days, he could kind of fight at those weight classes. And this has been happening with other fighters as well. When you take a look at Bernard Hopkins, for example, he was at the middleweight division for a while. But to be quite honest with you, Bernard at the least could have fought at 168, if not heavier, later on during his career. That's why he fit perfectly at the 175-pound weight class. That's why when I talk about Canelo Alvarez, people talk about him at middleweight like, dude, you don't understand how great you have to be at 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach. When you talk about certain fighters like a Bernard Hopkins, he was supposed to somewhat be great at middleweight because not only of his great boxing skills, but the dude was about 6 foot And on top of that, when you talk about his weight, like when you take a look at him versus Felix Tito Trinidad, the size isn't even close. Like Felix Tito, that's why when it comes to Bernard Hopkins, even though the man was an all-time great fighter, when people talk about his wins over Felix Tito Trinidad and Oscar De La Hoya, I mean, no offense against him, but I mean, I'm not going to say I don't count those wins, but that's why I say, like, Bernard Hopkins, when you talk about his career, in my view, as great as what he was, and he does have a lot of great wins, he is a bit overrated. Because in my personal view, to be in the top 10 or top 20 of all time, or at least in the top 10, you have to debatably be the greatest fighter of your generation, at least, debatably, the greatest of your generation when during your time. And I mean, some would debate maybe that Bernard was. In my view, he never was. In my view, it was either Roy Jones Jr., it was either Floyd or Manny Pacquiao. I don't think that Bernard was ever officially the greatest of his generation. Now, some people would say, well, what about Canelo Alvarez? He got defeated by Mayweather, and he definitely did. But Canelo Alvarez, after the Floyd Mayweather era, he was the greatest of his generation, at least debatably, with Crawford or Usyk or any one of those guys. In my view, you could debate Canelo as the greatest of his era. Now, in my view, would he be greater than Floyd Mayweather Jr.? No, not necessarily, but keep in mind also that was when Canelo was a bit younger. He would mature and become greater as a fighter. I still don't think that he's greater than Mayweather, but when Canelo reached his peak, Floyd Mayweather wasn't really a part of that era anymore. It was the Canelo, once again, and the Crawford and the Usyk era. So it was a little bit of a different era. But once again, when you talk about Bernard Hopkins, for example, he has great wins like Kelly Pavlik and Winky Wright and, a certain amount of those other guys. And what's very interesting is that Bernard Hopkins, I believe, the beat Winky Wright, brought him up a weight class. When he fought Felix Tito Trinidad, he clearly outsized Felix Tito Trinidad, and Oscar De La Hoya wasn't even a comparison in terms of the size difference, and then fought other guys. But what's very interesting is that Dante's Boxing Nation, whenever they talk about someone like a Canelo or other fighters that they try to tear down, they try to act like Canelo is the only fighter that's ever done that within history. Do you understand how many fighters have done this within history? Floyd Mayweather Jr., I believe, brought up Marquez 1 or 2 weight classes to fight. He also brought up Ricky Hatton, I believe, 1 weight class. When you talk about, once again, Bernard Hopkins, he brought up Winky Wright from a weight class. He clearly outsized Trinidad and clearly outsized Oscar De La Hoya. When you talk about those fighters, I mean, once again, this is nothing new. Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, they're a little bit depleted at 135. Now they have to move to 140. This is nothing new.
Another one where you seen him looking like Skeletor without the muscles when he was on the scale the morning of or the day before the Lomachenko fight, right? Versus Tank Davis, he just did in the interview. He said, I really don't get past 147, maybe 150, maybe. You know what I'm saying? But he said he'd be like 140, 147, maybe up to 150. He doesn't really go past that. But even though Lamont Roach is at a lighter weight class, his walk-around weight, which is he's probably at because he's probably not in camp yet, is probably higher than Tank Davis, especially when you consider somebody being taller. Like if two guys...
Isn't that very particularly interesting that this man is all of a sudden bringing up walk-around weight? Where was the same energy when it came to Jermell Charlo and Canelo Alvarez? Because Jermell Charlo's walk-around weight, I believe, is bigger than Canelo Alvarez. This is the same point that I was bringing up. Now, walk-around weight is not always the same as fight weight, of course. But once again, I agree somewhat with Boxing Ego's points. Now, do I believe legitimately that Lamont Roach Jr. is bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis? I'm not quite sure if I can state that because, I mean, if the man is taller, he's taller by what, half an inch, 1 inch? I mean, come on. It is what it is. And on top of that, this man has already lost to Jamal Herring. This man is not an A-grade level fighter. Like, give me a fucking break. Even if the man is a little bit bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis, it's not going to be that much of a factor. This man is not an A-grade level fighter. He does not really have anything major, in my view, to threaten Gervonta Tank Davis. He's got a little bit of boxing skill. He's not the worst fighter I've ever seen. He's a decent boxer, but he's not a guy that's super powerful. He's got decent speed, but I wouldn't say that he's exceptionally quick. He doesn't really have much reach, if any reach, over Gervonta Tank Davis, and he has about 1 inch in height. Like, come on, give me a break, But it's just very interesting, once again, how, when it comes to different fighters, how all of a sudden the standards change.
Like, just imagine if two guys, listen.
And Gervonta Tank Davis, once again, he has a very big walking around weight. Now, to be fair, Gervonta Tank Davis, at times, he seems to balloon up a little bit in weight because possibly of certain eating habits or other habits. And there's just certain fighters that are like that. Like Ricky Hatton, they used to call him Ricky Fatten because he used to really balloon up in weight, after training camps or after fights. Like he would almost get up to 200 pounds in weight because his fat ass, would basically eat himself out, after the fights. very undisciplined, if not in training camp. And there are certain fighters that are like that.
They had a similar build, like their arm size was the same, their legs look about the same, but then one person's taller. Who do you assume is probably gonna weigh more?
Well, it depends on the build, Mr. Boxing Ego. When you take a look, example, for like a Mike Tyson versus a Michael Spinks. Michael Spinks, I believe, was taller than Mike Tyson by about 2 to 3 inches, or maybe even 4 inches, but Mike Tyson probably was the heavier dude. Now, to be fair, a lot of people bring up Mike Tyson that he's 5'11" and that, oh, well, it's not height that matters, that is the weight. Well, it's a little bit of both. Height and, size are going to matter. And that's also the same reason why I didn't give Deontay Wilder that much of an excuse when Tyson Fury was the same height or damn near the same height as a Deontay Wilder, because Deontay Wilder has this punch that apparently can knock out anybody, which I think is, the case. But, he's 6'7" with about an 80-something inch arm reach. If the man overall is supposed to be the greater fighter, debatably, he's supposed to win that fight because you have the level of power and athleticism to do it, but you still couldn't do it. So once again, why was that? I agree with what some of the stuff that Boxing Ego is saying here a little bit. Now, of course, just because a fighter is taller, does that always mean that they're heavier? No, of course not. When you talk about, for example, like for example, Canelo Alvarez, if he got in the ring, against a guy like a Tony Harrison, of course, Canelo Alvarez would be heavier. If you're talking about, possibly some other fighters out there, Sebastian Fundora, I'm sure that he would not be as heavy as certain other guys. But at the end of the day, I understand what Boxing Ego is trying to say. And what I will state is this: height and reach are a little bit more important than what some people are really trying to let on. Because the taller you are, the harder it can be to reach your head, and sometimes to reach you, because that also can sometimes mean that you're a little bit harder to reach, and a lot of the times that means longer reach. It means that their punches can possibly hit first if they have the boxing level IQ and the boxing level skills. Height and reach definitely can be an equation, which is something that a lot of people also don't want to talk about. So people say that it's not the height and the reach, it's the weight. Well, actually, it's a little bit of everything. That's why when I say Deontay Wilder, even though he might only weigh 220 or 230 pounds in some of his fights, the fact that he's 6'7" with about an 82-inch arm reach, he might as well be 250 pounds, because if you have that type of punch and you have that type of reach, how many of those fighters are really going to be able to get in on you anyway?
If the body, like the phenotype.
And that's why I say the Charlo brothers, not only are they heavy and kind of weight bullies in my personal view for their weight classes, but they're like 6 foot with about a 73-inch arm reach. That's why Jermell Charlo doesn't get that much of an excuse from me for getting his ass whooped against Canelo Alvarez.
Pretty similar, but then one person happens to be an inch or two taller, then most likely the person who's a bit taller will have the weight advantage if you have a similar body type. So make no mistake about it, from the eye test, Ego Weight Watchers, aka Ew, I give you a look into the fighter life.
AKA we riding on Gervonta Tank Davis's we riding Gervonta Tank Davis. AKA overall that's the club. The Boxing Ego is Gervonta Tank Davis's #1 defender. And don't get it twisted, I like Gervonta Tank Davis. I understand what Boxing Ego is trying to say, and to a degree, I don't completely disagree with him. And, I could be a little bit surprised. Maybe Lamont Roach Jr., maybe he is just as big as Gervonta Tank Davis, or maybe he's even a little bit bigger. Do I personally believe that? At the current moment in time, no. But to be fair, I'd kind of have to look at the build. You can't always take a look at the weigh-in because they balloon up a little bit more in weight, sometimes. So we'll see. And Gervonta, once again, he balloons up a little bit in weight. He's a heavier dude for that weight class.
After progress picks, especially when they have a coming fight up, March 1st is going down. And Lamont Roach is bigger, people. He's bigger. And again,
we'll see about that, sir. I'm not really quite so sure about that. I need a little bit more evidence for that. Now, Boxing Ego could be right, but once again, it's just very particularly interesting. Where was this same energy with Jermell Charlo? You'll never hear this man say that Jermell Charlo was bigger than Canelo, even though, to be quite honest with you, he probably is by a little bit, or at least the same size as Canelo Alvarez, when you want to factor in everything. It's very interesting. We didn't see the same thing when Canelo was about to bring up Jermell Charlo. We didn't see this thing when Canelo Alvarez was possibly about to fight Andrade or Caleb Plant or something like that. We never seen this. Isn't that very particularly interesting?
I don't see anybody talking about that. Notice the usual suspects. They only bring up Tank when it's negative. If it's any
Right, and that's what haters do. So what that makes you is possibly a Canelo Alvarez hater and possibly a Shakur Stevenson and a Devin Haney hater. But I mean, the thing is that, when it comes to boxing ego, trashing Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson so roughly lately, I mean, the reason why he's doing that is because he's defending his boy toy Gervonta Tank Davis. So I don't really expect anything less. It is what it is.
negative about Tank, like people are saying he has tax issues and all stuff that don't have nothing to do with actual boxing, right? Oh, he got baby mama drama.
That's what you're concerned about, Mr. Boxing Ego. You're concerned about baby mama drama and tax issues, and you're supposed to be a boxing reporter. That's what you're concerned about. This man sounds like his publicist
He got kicked out the house.
or his PR agent. Like what? Like what the fuck? Like how much is Gervonta Tank Davis paying Boxing Ego really? Like Jesus Christ! Like this man sounds like Shannon Sharp with LeBron James. Like Jesus Christ.
He got personal problems, the police, like all this junk that don't really have nothing to do with him as a fighter. It's really chatty patty high school gossipy stuff,
Right, the same shit that you were talking about with Canelo Alvarez or possibly Vasily Lomachenko or Terrence Bud Crawford or other fighters that you wanted to tear down or did not like, or Tyson Fury when you alleged that Fury was cheating against Deontay Wilder. Isn't it very interesting how he talks about Chatty Patty and other people talk about all this drama bullshit and they're the first ones to spread drama when it comes to a fighter that they don't like? Ain't that a bitch?
TMZ style stuff, and that's what you guys are trying to turn the sport into, a bunch of TMZ. And
Well, let me tell you what, every single sport has a little bit of their TMZ. They have a little bit of their drama. That's just how it's going to be. And it's not just boxing. It's also NFL. It's also NBA. Every sport has their drama. And in my personal view, actually, it's not always a bad thing. As certain people say, there is no such thing as bad publicity. Now, I don't think that I don't agree with that completely. But sometimes it can bring even a little bit more attention to you. You don't want too much negative attention, of course, or in the wrong area. But sometimes it also can help your career a little bit. And of course it keeps boxing alive. So I don't think actually that it's a complete bad thing. But I understand what the man is saying.
we not with it. But then when there's something that makes Tank, like Tank, he had a turkey drive. People will talk about his baby mama drama. They'll talk about tax issues allegedly and rumors and stuff. They don't talk about he just did a turkey drive and gave back to the city. They'll say Tank is pulling up.
Well, to be honest, I really don't give a fuck about any of that. But I really don't give a shit about any of his girl issues or his domestic abuse issues or his tax issues or anything like that. All I really give a shit about is Gervonta Tank Davis getting in the ring. That's really all I give a shit about because I like to break down the sport of boxing. All that other shit, he pretty much can keep. I really don't give a shit about any of the other factors.
A smaller Lamont Roach, but they won't say that the alleged smaller Lamont Roach, when you seen him at both press conferences, Lamont Roach is bigger, right? People were saying,
Right, but once again, you can't always tell, by that of the press conference. So we're gonna see on fight night.
that Tank was scared and his energy was different at the first press conference. And then
I really don't see why Gervonta Tank Davis would be afraid of this man. Now, maybe Lamont Roach has something that I haven't seen. The only fight, to be quite frank with you, that I've only seen him in has been the Hector Garcia fight. And I mean, I was like, oh, he's a good little boxer. Like, he's decent. But did I see anything that was just extraordinary? No. And in order to beat someone like a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Canelo or a Crawford or an Usyk, you're going to have to be extraordinary. You have to be an extraordinary level talent to beat another extraordinary level talent. And I like Lamont Roach Jr. I think he's a good fighter. Do I think he's a great one? No.
the second press conference in D.C., he acted completely fine. And now people aren't saying that. Because the first one he was talking about retirement, his team wasn't there. I even seen people making up stuff saying his team wasn't there.
Very interesting. Isn't this the same dude that during the Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder thing about how he was talking about how Fury's energy is different and that he's afraid to fight Wilder a third time and blah, 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 all that bullshit? Isn't this the same person?
He fired Calvin Ford and Coach Kenny, and then they were there today. They were there at the D.C. press conference. So, again, watch where you get your information from. There's a lot.
I agree, including from you. Because no offense against Boxing Ego, but this man clearly, a lot of the times, is full of shit. Now, I don't completely disagree with what he said there, but once again, this is why I like to review videos, because after a while, people will show you what they truly think about certain standards. It's just that they're hating on certain fighters. Once again, why were these standards not applied with Canelo Alvarez? Once again, I keep telling people that these guys know the true greatness of Canelo Alvarez. That's why they talk about him 24/7. But anyway.
Of low quality information, and as boxing fans, you might as well just skip it. You might as well skip it. A lot of people, they're not really talking about anything. It's all like negative, vitriol, venom, and, stupid, gossipy stuff. Let's get back to some real boxing talk, people.
Right. Let's get back to real boxing, talking about taxes and and all that other shit. Anyway. But that pretty much is about it. I just wanted to talk about that because, once again, a lot of people really love to use this narrative about a fighter bringing up another fighter in weight when really that fighter might be really more natural to that weight that they pulled them up from. Now, of course, you can, of course, use, the thing or the excuse that, oh, that fighter that, they were coming up in weight, so you can't really give them full credit. I mean, you can do that if you want to, but if you want to use those standards, then no problem. Don't just use it with Gervonta Tank Davis. Use it also with Canelo. Use it with Mayweather. Use it with all those fighters that did that. All right, Bernard Hopkins, use it with those fighters as well. Use it with Andre S.O.G. Ward, with Chad Dawson, because he brought a fighter down in weight. Use it with all those fighters. Don't just use it with one fighter because you want to try and diminish their career. So it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.